love the channel and find it useful in becoming a happy retiree. Subscribe today. So we're going to go to the phones in a minute here, but I go back to this issue that goes back to the press will call it populism. Well, really, populism just means people are fed up with the system and the government, and they elect someone new. So we see great political change. We've seen it here in the United States. We saw it in Europe. We've seen it in the Philippines, for God's sakes. We've seen it all over the world. And it goes back to this one simple fundamental problem, and that's a lack of economic growth. 1965 to 08, that's over 50 years. The United States grew at a very steady average clip of over 3% a year, 3.1% on average. Since the Great Recession hit the entire world, we've only been growing at 1.9 to 2. That may not sound like an enormous shift, but that's a 35% slowdown in what was a more than 50-year trend. So we got used to it. It wasn't a blip. It was a generational trend of growth. Let me put that into context for you with miles per hour, since we're talking about driving. Let's do the math real quick. Let's say you're used to driving at 60 miles an hour. 60 miles an hour, right? That's a non-frustrating. You'd rather go. I'd rather go faster than that coming back from Michigan. But let's say you're used to going 60 miles an hour. Now you're going to reduce that by 35%. Now you're going 39. That's the math. 60 minus 35%. Now you've just slowed down on I-75 South coming back into Atlanta, and now you have to go 39 miles an hour on this long trip from Michigan. You know how frustrating that would be? You get run. First of all, you get run over coming back through Tennessee. You just get plowed over by a semi-truck. First of all, that's exactly what happens. Just 39 is too slow to go without being frustrating. And that slowdown has resulted in a $2.6 trillion cost. That's how much economic growth we would have had we continued to grow at that same 3.1% GDP growth pace. That has, again, that's not been the case. We've slowed down. So the economic volatility that we've seen has translated into political volatility. Something broke in the 07, 08, 09 recession. And it's meant smaller, slower growth ever since. And it's also led to outbursts like the Jamie Dimon one we've seen this week. He said, look, the U.S. has become one of the most bureaucratic, confusing, litigious societies on the planet. He said it's almost an embarrassment. Now, I'm not going to be embarrassed because there's still no better place to do business on the planet. But it really does go back to if we can't get something done. And again, it's not about just corporations. It's not just about reducing tax rates for big companies. It's for every American. So if the administration can make some breakthroughs in tax reform and in infrastructure, and I do think they're doing a decent job with regulatory reform on all this on a corporate level, it translates to growth for small businesses and jobs and wage growth, which again, we still have not seen wage growth for years. That's this $2.6 trillion worth of growth that we've been missing. Now, let's go back to this political disclosure, called a political discourse index, that gives us statistical proof of Washington conflict. It's called the Partisan Conflict Index, and it's maintained by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. There's an economist, Mariana Azamonte. He invented the index. It calculates the number of political discourse words that we see in publications. So think of this as an algorithm that tracks words like gridlock and filibuster and veto. And the higher the index level, the greater the conflict we see between the political parties. And it tracks, again, Wall Street, the algorithm goes in with an X-ray and seeks these words out on a daily basis from Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, Washington Post, you name it. And back in 2008, the index stood at about 80. As of this past June, it's over 200. So discourse has been rising and rising. It's 24% higher than it was only 2 years ago. The peak was back in October 2013, which is just a brief stint. during the government shutdown. But it continues to show that there is real measured discourse, conflict in Washington. And the problem with that is that not only is it frustrating for CEOs, it really leads to this discourse, or as discourse elevates, it slows down corporate investment decisions. And in turn, it slows down the pace of economic recovery. And that's part of the research that Azamati has done. But that's where we stand. And that's the issue we see with Washington and the economy. And we'll see if it gets any better this year. Perhaps it will. You may be saying, Wes, you're awfully optimistic. We'll see. Hi, I'm Wes Moss, and thanks for taking a minute to hear about what's so different about my new book, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think. So unlike other retirement books, this book will give you a step-by-step guide, whether you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, to learn from what these successful and happy retirees did to get there. I hope you enjoy the book, but more importantly, I know that it'll help you retire sooner than you think.